So, Judge, let's start out first with, and you have written about the lost history of FDR's court packing so-called scandal, and it is a timely piece because we are. It's already come up in the campaign. I think Pete Buttigieg, the mayor of South Bend, has said that he is open, that this should be on the table. He's one of our growing number of presidential candidates vying in the Democratic primary. Undoubtedly, this question is going to come up over the course of the campaign, as there is still, and I would argue rightfully so, a lot of sense that the Republicans have broken the Supreme Court appointment mechanism and process by denying a hearing to Merrick Garland and essentially stealing one of President Obama's court picks. And we are one justice away from a sort of almost a supermajority, if you will, on the Supreme Court by conservatives. So this is something that is going to be, that is very much in the air. And the give us a sense of, first, what the, I guess, conventional understanding of the court packing scandal is/was. And, you know, we're talking to people in this audience who may not have much of a background as even the context in which this took place.
Of course. Thank you. So the traditional understanding that probably the audience maybe vaguely remembers from history books is that after Franklin Roosevelt's 1936 landslide election victory in the presidential campaign, one of the biggest presidential campaign victories in American history, he very soon afterwards brought out a plan to add 6 new members to the Supreme Court, supposedly, of course, all of them Democrats and all of them sympathetic to his New Deal policies. He was upset with the old Supreme Court for striking down a host of different economic regulations that he thought necessary to recover from the Great Depression. And he was worried that any new proposals that he fronted over the next 2 or 3 years of his presidency would also be struck down by the Supreme Court. So his goal in the traditional telling was to add these 6 members to make sure that the court upheld his new economic proposals. And but the reaction to this was pretty severe and swift. The country rose en masse, again, supposedly the traditional story, to say that this was monkeying with the constitutional structure of American government. And even with a supermajority of Democrats in the House, the plan was shot down, and FDR never recovered politically, and the New Deal, as we know it, never really revived after this defeat. There are some, of course, aspects of this story that are true, but there's some parts of it that I think do get misunderstood and have been lost to history that I've been doing a little research on.
Well, give us a sense of what you think is true about that conventional wisdom about that period of history.
Yes, so there is no doubt that Roosevelt suffered what was the largest single political defeat of his entire career. The loss of his court packing proposal, or as he called it, the Judicial Reorganization Bill, permanently split the Democratic Party and did drive a significant number of them, especially conservative Democrats in the South, away from Roosevelt and his New Deal. A lot of political scientists and historians have argued that this split in 1937 presaged a sort of 30 to 40 year majority of a conservative coalition where conservative Southern Democrats aligned with Northern conservative Republicans to shoot down more radical economic reforms. And this is probably true. It is also true that Roosevelt was upset with the Supreme Court that had been striking down a number of his economic reforms, and that he did want a more sympathetic court. It is also true, which I didn't mention before, many people may remember one of the most famous lines to deal with the court packing incident was the joke about a switch in time that saved the 9 members of the Supreme Court. that one justice, Justice Owen Roberts, who had previously voted to strike down some New Deal legislation, started in the midst of this court packing fight to uphold a number of New Deal acts and therefore seemed to make Roosevelt's plan unnecessary. Research has shown probably that this had more to do with the different sorts of cases that were coming up to the court and less to do with him switching his mind for political reasons. But there was a switch in the Supreme Court rulings, at least as the public saw it, that seemed to make the plan less necessary. And again, these parts are true, and that it's hard to underestimate the ramifications of the court packing battle or of its importance for the New Deal and for Roosevelt.
Less necessary, or perhaps on some level, and I'm talking about what, at least the interpretations that I've seen, less necessary, or perhaps on some level, somewhat effective, right? Like this is indicative of a potential movement in society, or this is a way of, preventing the court packing by changing. I mean, I don't know if that interpretation, and of course you have, a revision to this history, but I don't know if that other interpretation is particularly plausible, that a judge would be so easily swayed by the potential of a court packing, but who knows, right? So these are all the sort of the prior interpretations of this event in history. And like you say, this is coming out of this. We had at least the viability of a significant portion of the New Deal, which, in other words, in another circumstance, might have been in jeopardy.
Yeah. So there is still an ongoing debate about how. And of course, it's very strange because it does deal with this very big national debate of what was going on in the mind of this one justice, Justice Owen Roberts, conservative appointed by Herbert Hoover. We do know now that he had already decided to switch his vote, or at least to uphold one of the Social Security Act and a minimum wage law in December 1936. So after Roosevelt was reelected, but before his court packing plan was proposed. As some people have joked before, it could be that Owen Roberts read the election returns. That could have been a part of it, even besides from the court packing proposal. But it seems unlikely that he merely was cowed by the political proposal to pack the court and switch his vote. And some people today who kind of argue for the court packing ideas seem to hope for a similar outcome. And I think the history is not with them in that regard. It seems unlikely that a justice would be, as you mentioned, so easily swayed to change its vote. And if anything, one would expect maybe a hardening of the opposite views.
Right. And we should say before we take a break here that I think the other theory that some people have in terms of floating the idea of court packing is that it may lead to other reforms, but I don't want to get ahead of ourselves in terms of the Supreme Court. Let's take a quick break. And when we come back, I want you to talk about the lost history of the court packing scandal and how this lost history may give us a better sense of a roadmap of how we can, what kind of reforms are possible for the Supreme Court. I'm Sam Seder. This is Ring of Fire Radio. We'll be right back in just a moment with Judge Glock.